April 1945, the grand halls of Hermann Göring's estate echoed with the weight of priceless art. Paintings by the old masters hung proudly, Vermeer's, Rembrandt's, and others looted or purchased during the Nazi plunder across Europe. Each canvas told a story of culture, beauty, and history. Yet beneath the opulence, a secret lingered, one that would soon unravel the myth of invincibility surrounding the Nazi elite. In a quiet studio, far from the battlefields, an unassuming man worked with meticulous care. Van Meegeren, a Dutch painter turned forger, mixed pigments with painstaking precision. His goal was not to create original masterpieces, but to breathe life into deception, to forge paintings so convincing they could fool the most discerning eyes. Van Meegeren's forgeries were no mere copies. They were crafted with an artist's eye, blending historical techniques with modern ingenuity. His forgeries of Johannes Vermeer, a master of Dutch Golden Age painting, were so flawless that even experts hailed them as genuine. Göring, head of the Luftwaffe and one of the Third Reich's most powerful figures, coveted Van Meegeren's Vermeers. He paid vast sums for these masterpieces, confident they were genuine trophies of conquest. The paintings adorned his private collection, symbols of both artistic triumph and personal greed. But the truth was hidden beneath layers of paint and varnish. Van Meegeren's skillful deception was a subversive act, a quiet rebellion masked by brushes and pigments. As the war ended and the Nazi regime crumbled, the forged paintings became evidence in a story that blurred lines between crime, art, and resistance. Van Meegeren's tale was not just about forgery. It was about survival, revenge, and the power of illusion in a world torn apart by war. This was the story of how fake art fooled one of history's most notorious men, shaking the foundations of both justice and cultural heritage. Han van Meegeren was born in 1889 in the Netherlands, a gifted painter whose early work showed promise but failed to capture the acclaim he sought. As taste changed and modernism rose, his traditional style fell out of favor, leaving him frustrated and desperate. By the 1930s, Van Meegeren faced accusations of plagiarism and forgery himself, damaging his reputation among art critics. Determined to prove his talent and secure his legacy, Van Meegeren turned to a daring plan. He would forge paintings attributed to the revered 17th century master Johannes. Vermeer's works were rare and highly prized, and Van Meegeren saw an opportunity to both restore his career and make a fortune. His forgeries were the product of intense study and innovation. Van Meegeren experimented with old canvases, created pigments using historically accurate recipes, and applied layers of varnish to simulate aging. He even devised methods to crack the paint naturally, fooling scientific tests of the time. The art world was captivated. Van Meegeren's newly discovered Vermeers were celebrated as masterpieces, fetching enormous prices from collectors and museums. Among these buyers was Hermann Göring, notorious for amassing art through both legal and illegal means during the Nazi occupation. Göring's obsession with art was well known. His collection was vast, representing the cultural plunder inflicted across occupied Europe. When Van Meegeren's Vermeers appeared, Göring eagerly acquired several, believing he possessed some of the greatest treasures of the Dutch Golden Age. Behind the scenes, Van Meegeren's life was complex. He was no simple criminal. His forgeries were also acts of defiance and artists tricking a regime responsible for immense destruction and theft. When the war ended, Van Meegeren's art became evidence in a high-profile trial where he faced charges of collaborating with the Nazis by selling stolen art. His defense shocked the world. The paintings were fakes, and he was the forger. This revelation turned the tables, recasting Van Meegeren from traitor to unlikely hero, a man who swindled one of the most powerful Nazis and exposed the fragility of their spoils. Van Meegeren's journey from struggling artist to master forger was marked by determination, creativity, and risk. After years of rejection, he honed his craft to a level that transcended mere imitation. His understanding of Vermeer's technique was so profound that his forgeries fooled not only buyers but also art, experts, and scientists of his time. The process was painstaking. Van Meegeren sourced 17th century canvases to maintain authenticity. He crafted paints using recipes from the period, including mixing bakelite into his varnish to age the paintings convincingly. His brushwork captured Vermeer's delicate play of light and shadow, a hallmark of the master's style. Each painting was a test of his skill and nerve. Selling these forgeries required confidence and patience. Van Meegeren navigated the art market with careful deception, slowly building a reputation as a discoverer of lost masterpieces. His timing was impeccable. The chaos of war created demand for cultural treasures, and Nazi officials were eager to display their spoils. When Göring acquired Van Meegeren's forgeries, it was the apex of the artist's risky gambit. Göring's position gave the paintings prestige, while Van Meegeren gained wealth and notoriety. Yet the artist lived in constant tension, aware that exposure meant ruin or worse. The war ended, and with it came the reckoning. Van Meegeren was arrested on charges of treason for selling art to the Nazis. Facing the grim prospect of a death sentence, he confessed, but not as a traitor. Instead, he admitted to forgery, proving that the paintings were fakes. To prove his claim, Van Meegeren painted a new Vermeer in prison, witnessed by experts and officials. The demonstration stunned the art world, validating his story and sparing his life. This confession transformed Van Meegeren's image. From disgraced artist to cunning trickster, he became a symbol of clever resistance against tyranny. His fakes, once symbols of deception, became legendary for their audacity and technical brilliance. Van Meegeren's story is a testament to the blurred lines between art and forgery, survival and defiance, crime and heroism in the shadows of war. His brush painted more than canvases. He painted a narrative of resistance hidden beneath layers of paint and lies. As World War II raged across Europe, the Nazi regime aggressively looted art from occupied countries, seizing priceless masterpieces to build the ultimate collection. Hermann Göring, one of Hitler's highest-ranking officials, was obsessed with amassing these treasures. His private collection grew vast, a symbol of Nazi power and cultural domination. Yet beneath this grandeur lay a dangerous vulnerability. The idea that a small, unassuming Dutch painter could fool the Nazi elite with forged Vermeers seemed impossibly absurd. Even Vermeer's works were rare and revered, and experts were expected to spot any fake immediately. How could Van Meegeren's skillful deceptions possibly survive the scrutiny of such a regime? Van Meegeren's plan was audacious. He would not only forge Vermeer paintings, but also sell them to the Nazis themselves, profiting from their greed and arrogance. This was no ordinary forgery. It was a high-stakes gamble, a dangerous game, played against the most powerful men of the time. The stakes were life and death. If caught, Van Meegeren faced severe punishment, possibly execution, accused of treason for dealing with the enemy. But if successful, his forgeries would undermine Nazi claims of cultural supremacy, secretly resisting their tyranny with brushes instead of bullets. Van Meegeren's forgeries were so convincing that even the top experts vouched for their authenticity. This impossible idea relied on meticulous research, mastery of 17th century techniques, and nerve under pressure. Each painting was a calculated risk. A lie so artfully crafted it became truth in the eyes of its buyers. When Göring acquired several of these forgeries, the deception reached its peak. The Nazi leader proudly displayed his Vermeers, unaware they were elaborate fakes. Van Meegeren had turned the enemy's obsession against them, selling illusions while the real masterpieces remained hidden or lost. The war's end brought exposure. Van Meegeren was arrested for collaboration, but in a dramatic twist, confessed to forgery instead. To prove his innocence, he painted a Vermeer-style canvas in custody, demonstrating the skill that had fooled the Nazis. His story shattered assumptions about authenticity, expertise, and power. The impossible idea was realized. Not only had he created masterful forgeries, but he had done so under the shadow of war and oppression, fooling one of history's most ruthless men. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Han van Meegeren, once a disgraced artist, now stood at the center of one of the most extraordinary trials of the post-war era. The charges against him were severe: collaboration with the Nazis by selling them stolen art. The sentence, if convicted, could be death, But Van Meegeren had a secret weapon, his confession that the paintings sold to Hermann Göring were fakes, brilliant forgeries he had painstakingly created. To prove it, he agreed to paint a Vermeer-style canvas under the watchful eyes of experts and officials. As the brushes touched the canvas, the courtroom watched in stunned silence. With deliberate strokes, Van Meegeren recreated the subtle play of light and color that defined Vermeer's work. The resulting painting was a masterpiece of deception, a living proof of his skill. The courtroom drama unfolded with mounting suspense. Experts who had once authenticated the paintings were forced to admit they had been fooled. The Nazis' prized possessions were nothing more than clever fabrications. Van Meegeren's act of forgery became a symbol of resistance and artists outwitting a regime that prided itself on control and domination. His deception was not just a crime, it was a subversive act that exposed the fragility beneath Nazi grandeur. The trial ended with Van Meegeren avoiding the harshest penalties, his legacy transformed from traitor to folk hero in the eyes of many. The fake Vermeers became legendary, illustrating how art, deception, and survival intertwined in the darkest chapters of history. Beyond the courtroom, the impact rippled through the art world. Van Meegeren's techniques challenged methods of authentication and raised questions about trust, expertise, and the value placed on cultural artifacts. His story remains a dramatic tale of courage, creativity, and audacity, a reminder that even in times of war, the human spirit can find ways to resist oppression through unexpected means. After the war, Han van Meegeren's story shook the art world and challenged notions of authenticity, value, and resistance. His forgeries, once celebrated as genuine masterpieces, revealed the vulnerabilities of experts and collectors alike, even those at the highest levels of Nazi power. By fooling Hermann Göring, Van Meegeren not only secured his own survival, but also struck a symbolic blow against a regime built on theft and domination. The trial revealed the complexities of art, truth, and justice in wartime. Van Meegeren was neither simply a criminal nor a traditional hero. His actions blurred the line between deception and defiance, illustrating how survival and resistance can take many forms. The episode also exposed how art had become a weapon and a prize in the brutal conflict. Historically, Van Meegeren's case influenced art authentication practices, leading to more scientific approaches in detecting forgeries. His story remains a cautionary tale about the fragile nature of cultural heritage, especially during times of war and upheaval. Han van Meegeren died in 1947, leaving behind a legacy both controversial and fascinating. To some, he was a cunning forger who exploited greed and ignorance. To others, he was a clever resistor who used his talents to undermine a ruthless regime. His story continues to resonate as a reminder that human creativity can both deceive and inspire. Van Meegeren's life challenges us to consider the complex moral landscape of survival under oppression. His forgeries, once reviled, are now recognized as remarkable feats of art and subversion. The narrative also highlights the power of art not just as objects of beauty but as tools of influence and resistance. Van Meegeren's brushes painted not only false images but also a striking statement against tyranny. Today, museums and scholars study his work and story, reflecting on how art intersects with history, politics, and identity. His tale remains a compelling example of how individuals navigate the blurred boundaries of right and wrong in extraordinary times. This is the history of World War II. Whoever oppresses the innocent is an oppressor. Neither the earth belongs to this oppressor, nor does the sky belong to him. We stand now and forever with the oppressed. This is WW2 Files. See you in the next one.